Well, so part of the rituals with your grandma was church, and you describe how like your uncle was Gil, is that right? Your uncle's Gil?
No, that was one of her husbands.
Oh, pardon me. Right. And so, this idea of like her kind of I don't know, stilted or kind of uncomfortable relationship with your mom at times. Gil, and then there were multiple husbands for grandma, right? Multiple men in the life. But just this idea of like the two families for in your case, right? For where your father you describe your memories of him as folded, quote unquote. And your mom, it really says a lot about your mom. Your mom, when seeing that he had a previous family, right? She basically said, the only person I can rely on is me. So I wonder kind of, I guess, a long way of getting at like how your mom and your grandma kind of butted heads at times, like all mothers and daughters do, all sons, and. But what was it about their personalities and maybe their histories that made them clash at times?
I think one big thing for sure is they both were grudge holders.
Mm,
And so if they were arguing about, dinner, suddenly it would turn into this thing that happened like a month ago. And so there was just a lot of baggage that they both carried. And then I think, my mom was so afraid to be vulnerable to ask for help
mm,
that then if she did finally like decide to ask for help and for some reason at that point whoever it was could not do it, then she just saw it as like reaffirming, see, I
right.
can't rely on anyone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she set herself up to kind of, it was unrealistic for like this one time I asked you to do something
Hmm.
or ask for your help that you can't do it.
Right.
'Cause, I mean, my grandma helped her a lot. She watched me and my sister and didn't really charge my mom anything. And my
Hmm.
grandma was already retired, but she's a bartender and very blue collar worker up until that point. And
Hmm.
so she didn't have a lot of money. And so
Yeah.
she would take us places. And so my mom would give her, I think, like $50 a week. And then she would complain about that. But that's how she would buy me
Right.
food.
Right.
And but she would always buy me like little toys or
It wasn't like your grandma was like, stealing off the top or something like that, right? And like
yeah,
saving
like
$45 every. Yeah.
exactly. She's buying groceries and things like that were going into my stomach.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
it's just kind of, it was odd witnessing that. And then also as a child, like not having the words to like know what you're witnessing and convey like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Um, so that was odd, like to know it, because I have distinct memories of me thinking like this is really weird. But I didn't know what was weird about it
Mm.
until later.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, obviously, speaking of words, obviously you traffic in words. You're a wordsmith, and there's like the double meaning of like scars, the scars for your grandma, like big injuries in her life, physical, but also emotional, mental. There's a great passage here. It's quote, saying life was hard for my grandma in English doesn't suffice. The words lack feeling. In this case, español tiene más sentimiento. Le tocó muy dura la vida a mi Ita. She believed the hardships of her life were her penance. I think Ita prayed for 7 deep scars no one ever saw. She prayed for mistakes and self doubt, the weight heavy. Mostly she prayed that she had made the right choices all those years ago. If I could snap, I would. In agreement or just in approval. Wow. But yeah, it's a tough life for her to say the least, right? You have I guess a chapter that's just dedicated to those scars, and it's such an interesting and creative way to do storytelling. Where did that idea come from to like break down the scars, and then obviously that's a microcosm for your grandma. It's representative of your grandma's life.
Yeah, it all started with that memory of her bathing. Because I grew up in a household of women, and if you have to go to the bathroom, you go to the bathroom, even if
Mhm.
someone's bathing, because we literally was one of those old bathtubs. There was no shower,
Ah,
so you
yeah.
could only bathe. And if I had to pee, I had to go. And so we often saw each other naked. Of course, I was a kid, so I was more like, no. And as an adult, she just didn't care. And so I just remember watching her get out of the bathtub one time and just, you see something every day that you don't really realize it. But that day, for some reason, I saw like, whoa, wait a minute, because
Yeah.
the scar on her back was huge. Obviously, her mastectomy scar was pretty jagged because it was early on in mastectomy.
No, yeah.
And so it was just like, wow, I really just saw her body as this like carrying a story.
Mm.
Um, and you know,
Stories, right?
yeah, stories, yeah,
Yeah.
like multiple stories. And so when I started writing it, I didn't know how to organize it. And then I just thought, why don't I just start with like if I'm looking at her,
Hmm.
like moving down sort of her body. And it just ended up working really well. And sort of these little snippets of pieces and stories of her life. And then of course I had to talk to my mom for some of those to fill in. Because I was like, how did this one happen? And how did this one happen?
Yeah.
And yeah, they just turned into little like capsules.
I mean, there needs to be a movie made about grandma. You know, I mean, what a life.
That would be great. From
What
your
a,
from your mouth, someone's gonna hear you.
there you go. There you go. Who plays your grandma in the movie?
Well, I don't know. You know, some
Put you on
my
the
best
spot.
friend asked me that. And I was like, oh no, it has to be someone like, but I can't think of anyone. Rita
One of a
Moreno.
kind, right? One character,
Yeah,
one of a kind. But
I was going to Rita Moreno, but now she's a little too old.
okay.
Uh, it's a little too elder. I shouldn't say old because she's beautiful. I saw her recently at a film festival and I was in awe.
Huh.
But yeah, she's just a little out like older
Right.
than my grandma would have been at that time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a memoir, so by nature, it's personal. It's confessional, that kind of thing. And there's part where we were talking about like the complicated relationship between your mom and your grandma, and you write about how you wish you'd pointed out why your mom wouldn't come up to the apartment sometimes because she was too tired, it'd been a long day, and then why Etha wanted her to. She missed her daughter, etc. And so
Right.
obviously, I mean, we all understand, like, there's no reason for you to feel guilt. We all understand guilt or wish we could have, and just really appreciate you putting yourself out there like that. But you write beautifully about, we talked about Prieta. This is the passage about why it's so special to you, or one of. Prieta is a term of endearment. When I tell people who don't speak Spanish what Prieta means, dark or the dark one, their eyes pop open and a small gasp escapes. I see the offense they feel for me sprinkled on their faces like the freckles I will never have. How do I tell them that when I heard Ita say Prieta, I felt the caress of her strong hands on the top of my head as she braided my hair? How do I tell them that I never knew what Prieta really meant, etc., until some light-skinned Mexican kid laughed at me? Beautiful writing there. I felt the caress of her strong hands on the top of my head, just with that word. Beautiful. I remember as learning Spanish, I was shocked when my friend's mom called him gordito. I was like, oh, I just learned gordo. I just learned what that means, but it's ito and it's between, all that
There's
stuff.
affection
I was new
there.
to the
Yeah.
language. There's affection there, right? There you go. And then you end part one because part two is called Finding Yasmin. And it's, not like it totally changes subject matter, but it's a little bit more focused on you. But this, again, creatively, like, incredible. You have this imagined huge family because Ita had previous miscarriages, and you have this. I mean, it's so well done. It's an imagined, this huge family, and so he would have been born. He would have been like this, and he would have brought this girlfriend over. Just like futurism was not the word, like speculative. I don't know what you would call that. Just that little section. Was that written separately? Was that written like just for one assignment, and then it became part of the book, or was it all together?
So originally when I was writing the book, I was writing it as a collection of short stories.
Ah,
So it wasn't like the chapters that you see here. So I was thinking of it more as a collection. And when I was
collection
writing
of
that piece,
sorry, collection of essays or short, like fiction or nonfiction?
well, I was thinking
Creative
like
nonfiction?
fiction or like, yeah, creative nonfiction.
Okay.
But then I sort of, because my background was a fiction writer.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do something to discuss, that very heavy load that my grandma carried.
Oh,
And I was trying to think of how I could write about it without well, one, showing judgment or how I felt about it. And I was very afraid that others were going to judge her. I think that was probably the only moment where I was writing this that I thought like I was very protective of her. I didn't want anyone to think badly of her. And I remembered when I was a kid, I would watch her, as she was praying, she would just kind of gaze off and she was not necessarily there with me at that moment. And that gaze stayed with me. And I thought, well, what if she was just imagining like this whole other life that she could have had if she had been able to keep, those children? And that's how I got the idea to have this whole made up
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun writing it. Um, and then also it's almost like I got to live in her imagination for a little while. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so it was really beautiful and then, bittersweet when I get to the end
I bet.
of it.
I bet.
But yeah, I think that was my idea to approach it sort of from a neutral stance, and I'm lucky that I got that idea.
Mm. Yeah, shoot, you talk about meta, like you said, you got to imagine as her, like we got to imagine through you, through her. Yeah, I mean, there's levels there, man. So yeah, part two is finding Yasmin, and you write about at the beginning about just wanting to be noticed. You know, everyone in the world can understand that. Kind of distancing yourself a little bit more from grandma. There's the great or well known. I think is it Cherokee? It's the idea of feeding the wrong wolf,
Hmm.
right? Whichever one, the good or evil. I think I'm oversimplifying, but like whichever one eats better is the one that's fed better. I guess I'm just kind of wondering, how did you feel like you were feeding the wrong wolf, or were you? What did that mean to you?
I think, and I think this is where adult me looks back on like younger Yasmin and maybe is like, why did you do that? Like, but I have to remember that younger Yasmin was not her brain was not completely developed.
Right?
She didn't know a bunch of stuff, and so her idea of fun of like, or crushing on a guy and going and smoking pot up on the side of a mountain was a good idea. And now adult Yasmin is like, what are you doing? You went up there with three guys by yourself. Like that could have been
Yeah, yeah,
really bad.
yeah.
Um, and I'm so blessed that I was just around some cool guys that wanted to get high, you know?
Right.
But so I think that's what I mean. I put myself in kind of some dangerous situations sometimes. I distance myself from my family. Um, Not just like physical distance, but I didn't want anything to do with like kind of what they thought was acceptable.
Mm,
And it was a huge rejection to me too. Like I started to reject a lot of my culture because I didn't want to be um I don't know, I didn't want to be the Mexican girl with long hair.
mm,
And so I slowly started cutting my hair
mm-hmm.
and listening to rock and um just distancing myself overall from whatever I thought was maybe and I think this comes a lot from like distancing from my father's side of the family because I didn't want anything to do with them.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think I was just feeding the wrong wolf and not really looking at things critically and
Mm.
just reacting versus um I don't know, thinking about things just a little bit longer.
I mean, what you're describing, I mean, as a high school teacher, like I've never ever seen that with any of my students, ever. Where there may be doing things that you kind of ask why. I've never. I'm being sarcastic, of course.
I'm all we all did it. I know.
Yeah, we
That's
all
where
did.
we all did.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, I decided that it was somehow safe that I would put my big old backpack as a high school freshman. I just put it under the in the locker room, under the seats, under the bench, and somehow nobody would steal it. I just thought that made sense. Those kind of things, right?
Yes, those
Um,
kinds of things.
but so yeah, so one of the guys you met, Paisan, Angelo, right? Angelo you describe here. And he was somebody you talk about with like your relationship with your dad, and that you'd made, this isn't just a quick, over a couple months, but over a couple years, you made these trips to see your dad. That trip with him was very awkward. It sounds like dad thought you were there to share news of your impending wedding. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And
That
then right. And then these visits, and they were awkward, and I guess it was when you're about age 19, and that really seemed like you were just kind of like, this is it. Like, I'm sure again, bittersweet was the word, that it was kind of like, this just isn't working. I'm trying too hard. I'm not trying, and that made you, in some ways, made you move to Dallas, right? To live with your older sister. Am I getting the
Yeah.
connection right there?
Yes. I think it was that. I think that was like the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Because I had just gone through so many things that were new to me. When you're used to being like the really smart kid in school, and then you go to college and suddenly
Hmm.
you're one and like hundreds in a classroom and they don't even know your name. And that's like very shocking, right? I was used to being praised all the time, like, oh, this is so great. And then there was nobody holding me accountable. I was like, oh, they don't take
Hmm.
attendance, this is awesome.
Right.
uh so failing out of college, um get working at the airport. I did not love that job.
Hmm.
It was just a lot of stuff that I was like, this isn't working for me. And I just felt really aimless and lost. And I hadn't had that feeling before, because I was always like very goal oriented. Like, I'm doing
Yeah.
XYZ for this.
Right.
And that was the first time that I didn't have a plan
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was really great of your mom. Like, it sounds like a little bit later on, but you were saying like, oh, like you were going to go to grad school. Then you're like, no, I'm not. And then your mom said something basically about, hey, in your own time, right?
Yeah.
In your own time. And so, yeah. So you began to work a lot of like, I don't know, retail too generic of a term.
No, I mean, at its core, it's retail. It's just
Yeah.
fancy, high end retail.
Right. And so, you were working the floor, you had some, but you did decide to write. There was a lot of things that went on, like we talked about earlier with, later on, you really lost any love for that type of work, but you always appreciated like being able to help those with the scars, those who had mastectomies, because that was, keeping you closer to grandma, to Ita. Um, Unfortunately, when you were in Dallas, she passed away, and you described, you returned to El Paso, and just obviously, I mean, just huge grief for everybody involved. Um, but you read about it a lot, but I don't know what it was exactly, but you put a real unique spin on it. But just like, you couldn't cry, you didn't cry. Was that you putting that on yourself? Was that some sort of external pressure? Like,
I definitely, there was that. Um, it's like I couldn't, like, I felt like everything was muted at that point. Like, everything was just at a distance and far away.
yeah,
And that was the first time that I saw my mom not as a mom, but as a woman who
right,
just lost her mother.
right,
So that's always like a big slap in the face when you see your parents not as a parent any longer. Um, and so my sister and I both had to, be the ones to take care of things,
mm-hmm.
because my mom was completely incapable of it.
Yeah,
And that, I think that's where it's just kind of like I shut a part of my brain off so that I could do what I needed to do.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's something so profound and so like sad and beautiful and all the above about like, just the women, right? You were around the apartment, and you were, who's going to keep this and who's going to keep that, and also some like, oh man, remember this, and all of that. But with obviously with a lot of, it's not like she had a couple of decent ones, but some real jerks, some real pendejos for Ita, right? And unfortunately, dad was not in the picture. It's just like, your sister and her. There's something about that was so stirring. Um, then the Pinot Grigio hit, huh? And let it all
Yeah.
out. Was there like a, not happiness is not the word because it was such a sad time, but like, was there a relief or a catharsis in finally being able to let it out, even if it was maybe through alcohol?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It felt, for lack of a better term, I felt like I had just, like, my mouth was taped shut. Like, I
Mm.
just couldn't, because I wasn't even talking very much at that point.
Mm.
Um, like, I wrote the scene where we're at the church and the priest is trying to be very priestly, and I was just like, get the fuck away from me.
Right, 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 right,
Like, I
right.
didn't say that, but my gaze definitely said it.
Uh,
Um, and so, uh, yeah, I think at that moment it was nice just to like scream and yell
mhm.
and sing and try to remember songs from when I was a kid. Um, the next day hurt a lot, but but for that brief amount of time, I was able to just finally let some of the grief out, because it's a lot to carry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how would you describe the Hombre de Dios?
Um, it's like, do you mean in a literal sense or the story itself?
The story itself.
The story itself, so it came from that phrase, right? Hambre de Dios, tienes hambre de Dios, that I always found was interesting that my Ita would say when like we had the munchies. We're like, oh, I want this. The story kind of came out of anger actually, because you know, my Ita believed in God and church and was very Catholic. And I was just so disappointed. Like I'm like, she prayed to you all the time, and
Mm,
this is it. Like this is how
mm,
this happens. And there was this sort of sense of satisfaction that, and maybe this goes back a little bit, right, to where I talked about Anne Rice and how she's playing with God in her stories.
mhm.
That I was like, I'm gonna play with it, and I'm gonna just eat him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
um that, and eat him and then still not feel satisfied. And um I feel like there's a lot of loneliness in people seeking religion, and it just makes you lonelier because you're waiting for an answer that's never going to come.
Damn, damn.
And that and that's
Yeah,
how I felt at
yeah,
that point.
yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. That those, I guess, couple pages where that's pretty trippy stuff, right?
yeah, I had fun with it. It was a lot of fun writing
I
that.
I bet, I bet. So we talked about, like, you had like the eureka moment about, hey, this is not it, like working in retail, because you'd gone back to Dallas after those, there's something about, I'm sure, about going to El Paso, seeing everything again, feeling all those feelings, and then going back to Dallas, where you wrote about, like, you felt, it's like almost like a different country. You said it's 9-12 hours away. Some people didn't know El Paso was in Texas. Very much more white, right, than El Paso, not on the border, just different. And Angie, your sister, said, come home. You wanted to do creative writing, UTEP, got that program, right? Um, I wonder just about that sense of rejuvenation that came when you came back to El Paso.
When I first got back, I did everything so quickly, um, that I was like, I'm quitting and coming home. And 2 weeks later, I was home.
Mm-hmm.
And there was interesting, I thought I was coming home, but I wasn't. I didn't actually come home because my home didn't exist anymore.
Uh-huh.
And so I was living with my mom and her husband, who she got married that decade that I was gone. And he was a very kind man who let me live with them for a little while, but it just felt weird because I'd been on my own for so long and now I'm
Yes.
living at home. But the first thing I did, I like literally slept for a week.
Mm.
Um,
Come on, literally,
I
literally.
literally I did. I like would wake up to eat and then I would just go back to bed and I would
That's
fall asleep
awesome.
again.
That's awesome.
Um, I was like a cat, honestly. Um, and I was just so tired. That I just slept. And then my mom was, it was interesting because she told me, I don't want you to work. I don't know what that place did to you, but you cannot work
Mm.
for a month. And I was like, what do you mean? Um, but I think that's what I needed.
Yeah.
And then of course I started getting a little stir crazy. I want to say like 2 weeks in, I started reorganizing their
Sure.
kitchen cabinets and things like that. um, but it was nice and scary at the same time, because like I said, the home that I remember didn't exist any longer. So I had to kind of make like this new home, and
Yeah.
um, it was weird and scary. I was really scared for a big chunk of time. Like, is this gonna work?
Yeah.
And then little things would happen, like when and even in the program, because up until then, so I started to show people like some short stories that
Mm.
I'd written, and my friends were like, "These are amazing." And then I got into the program, and people were like, "These suck." So I was just like, "Oh no, what did I do?"
Yeah.
Um, but I think then I just embraced being home. And I think that's apparent in the book, and little things like the program and the story and music, and finding joy in cooking and food again, because
Mm.
I'd even lost that.
Yeah. 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 How would you describe the look on the guy's face? You went to like the tire shop or whatever, and you said it was a little different than Dallas, where you had to spell your name, but in El Paso, he kind of looked at you like you're spelling
Oh
out
my,
Yasmin. Right? What kind of look did he give
I
you?
mean, I feel like I felt like at that moment, the whole place just went silent and they were all looking at me like, what is she doing? And I
Yeah.
felt so stupid because the other thing is I was using like my white voice. At that point, I had like a retail Dallas white voice. So I was like, Yasmin, Yasmin, Ramirez, RAM. And then I was like, oh my God, no, I can't do that here. um, I can use my normal voice, which I mean, I don't, it's weird that I have that, but because my normal voice doesn't have an accent. But um, when
That's funny.
you're surrounded by, you know, Prada and Versace and something happens to you.
That's funny. So yeah, so I mean, you got to be in that class with involving food and writing and Dr. Abarca, and she just had this much passion for it. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I know where someone like you're just like, I want to get that passion, whatever it is, right? Um, and we talked about the piece that you wrote about Ita taking off her makeup and how that wowed the class. That was featured in the book in your book. What was it about that class that like gave you that was like a catalyst for you to write in general, write this book?
I think really I'm so grateful to Lex Williford. He actually ended up being my thesis director.
Okay.
And so he like his excitement what both dumbfounded me, but then also excited me. And when I was working with him, because you know we had to come up with a thesis, and at first I was like, oh, I should do something with fiction, and I had some other fiction stories that I'd written that I liked a lot. But then I don't know, I was like, do I want to do this or do I want to do like this? And so I sat down with him and I told him, I think I want to write a memoir. And he's like, about your Etha. And I said, yes. And he's like, well, it's not going to be easy.
Mm.
And I was like, okay. And he's like, I'm not kidding, Yasmin. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be really hard. And so I was just like, okay, I can do it. I can do it.
Mm.
Yeah. And and then poor Lex, like 6 months later, I was in his office crying, like, I don't want to write this
Uh,
anymore. And but he was so nurturing. He wasn't like, never did he tell me, like, I told you so. He was
yeah,
like, it's just this part. It's okay. It'll be
yeah.
okay. And so he was just really nurturing to me. And I didn't feel uncomfortable sharing pieces with him. So
Mm.
that is also he gave me a safe place.
Yeah.
And that was so beautiful. So yeah, I'm very grateful.
I don't know if I'm using the term right, but like he's like a beta reader,
Yes, yeah, a beta
right?
reader, and then he would like push me in certain
Hmm.
parts, like you need to do this, and
Yeah.
then it was interesting because, as I mentioned, he didn't speak Spanish very well, and so I had to explain like nicknames to him. Like my
Mm.
grandma called my mom gorda, and he used Google Translate, and he's like, "Did I get this right? Your grandma calling your mom the fat?"
The fat.
So the
Lagoon.
fat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, yes, but no. And so he kind of helped me in certain spots because I told him my grandma cannot speak English. That's like she spoke English, but she didn't speak English in
Mm.
that she was more comfortable speaking in Spanish. I'm like, I can't have her voice in English. And so he just kind of warned me, like, if you're gonna try to get this published, it might not be as easy. And I said, okay, that's fine, but it's not gonna be real if I write her in English.
Yeah.
And so he just, guided me and then, but also let me make my decisions about things,
Mm.
but just would warn me about hurdles I might encounter later.
Right. Have you ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting?
Yes,
I'm
but
thinking
it's
of
been a
like
while.
I'm thinking of like when you were saying like, oh, he was saying, oh, it's gonna be hard, and you're like, I know. And he's like, no, 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 it's really gonna be hard. So like Robin Williams tells Matt Damon, he says, it's not your fault. And Damon goes, I know. He goes, no, it's not
Oh,
your
yes,
fault.
that
Remember
scene.
that?
Yes,
Oh
yes, yes.
man, right? You're like, no, 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 it's really not your fault. No, 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 it's not gonna be easy. And obviously I know it wasn't easy for you, but I mean, you write towards the end of the book, you write about like the dream, like you dream about your grandmother and your subconscious. And you were like, some people say dreams don't matter. Blah, blah. You're like, no, she was telling me in the dream, te quiero. I mean, what an incredible message to get in a dream, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then, as you had your own mammograms and thank God everything was fine, but just like that was so, again, haunting and beautiful and sad where you were like, felt like you were crying for you. It was like you were going through that same, you were going through the same thing that your Ethan had gone through when she had it had been, positive for her. Positive meaning the opposite of negative with x-rays and stuff. Um, and then the dream and like this heaviness, you write quote unquote heaviness just about writing the book. And how about the line that really stuck with me so much is that you can't carry her forever. You can't carry her forever. What did that mean? What does that mean for you?
I think initially I was writing stories about her to hang on to memories, but it was also, I had so much guilt, an incredible mountain of guilt. Because I didn't see her for 2 years before she died because I was too busy working. Um, and I became very resentful for that because I was too busy selling rich people high price items.
Right.
And I just felt so shallow and so empty. And so that was in there too. It was kind of like I think part of writing sections of the book was like a penance for me,
Mm,
right? Going back to like my roots, my Catholic roots. It was a penance
mm,
of not giving her the attention I should have, and then now doing it now. Um, but in the process, somehow I kind of like realize things. I mean, like you can't stay with your parents or your grandparents forever. Right. My grandma certainly did it. And
mm.
so that's something that my mom like reminded me of. Um and I think that was her sign to me, like you have to like close it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You have to stop. And I listened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the dream, right? You were like literally trying to hold her, but she was too heavy.
Hmm.
Like, man, like, I mean, I know those, I don't know, I speak for myself, but like, feel like those dreams that are like so direct and not obvious, but are few and far between, right? So when we have them, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, because I mean, you carry it. Like I can still
Mm.
remember how I felt waking up from that
Yeah.
dream.
Yeah.
Um,
Tears.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes. I was
Yeah.
I was distraught, and then it was weird because it's like 5 in the morning and it's dark, and then I'm afraid. I felt like a little kid again. I was afraid to like open my eyes and look in the dark because
Yeah.
I was
Yeah. Yeah.
afraid like she was gonna be there.
Huh.
That kind of like visceral dream.
Yes.
So it was heartbreaking for me because it's also like I didn't want to let her go at the same time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it was definitely hard, but I don't know. Now that I get to do things like this, I think it's kind of beautiful because she's living on in a way that she never ever could have imagined. And I think that she finds so much glee in it.
Hmm.
Like this happiness that maybe she didn't find in her own lifetime.
Wow, that's heavy and that's deep and beautiful. And I hope I feel like I really got to know her through the book. What a character, what a person. Um, and so, thanks so much for sharing about your whole family's, stories and about your grandma. And I mean, this is such a good book. It could be like, you could be a one book person the rest of your life and it'd be incredible. Do you have future projects though?
I do. I'm going in a completely different route. I need a break from memoir.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, yeah, I started writing a book. I think it's going to be YA is where it's going.
Oh,
And so it's about a girl who wants to be a rock star.
I was
And
gonna say
she
right about
she
Nirvana. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or Rockstar. Okay.
well, I mean, I'm
Or
sure that
Paramore
Nirvana
or
will be
something.
in there. No, not Paramore.
Oh, no. Ouch. I hit a nerve. Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm all,
No, it's
oh
good.
no.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right.
But no, so her stage name is Lola Coca-Cola for the
Uh,
Kinks song. Um,
okay. Yes. Okay.
so I'm kind of playing with this idea and making a soundtrack of her life with each chapter.
Mm.
So I'm having a lot of fun with it. I had to take a break, obviously, doing stuff with Ándale, Prieta. But my goal, I was supposed to try to finish it last summer, but it didn't work. So this summer is it, because I don't
Okay.
have time to write during the semester when I'm teaching.
I bet.
It's really hard for me. So I write all summer.
Do you have a tentative title?
Right now I'm just calling it Lola Coca-Cola. It's probably
Mm.
gonna change.
Yeah.
Because like the Ándale, Prieta was not the title of the book
What was it?
either. No, it was supposed to be Por un amor, which is the song title.
It's from the
So music,
lyrics. Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
I have a thing with music for sure.
Last thing before we wrap up, one thing I failed to mention. It's so cool that you do a little playlist or whatever throughout the book. I mean, obviously music, scent, smell, and music are so closely related to memory. And I can definitely speak to that. And you wrote about some of those songs that grandma would be listening to when doing whatever, and you're like, go listen to that right now. And there's one, I forget what song it was, be like, don't listen to that now. All right. But that was so cool to have that playlist. And then the book ends with some of her great recipes too. One of the recipes is it's not caldo, it's caldillo or is
Caldillo,
that the
yeah.
same as a caldo?
It is, but it's more like a stew. And I think
Okay.
it's like an El Paso thing
Okay.
because if I say caldillo to someone like like a Mexican American person from somewhere else, or even if I say caldillo in Mexico, I haven't been to Mexico, but if I said it, I don't think it makes sense because I've said it to other people. Like I have a friend from Durango and she was like caldillo, like caldo, like sopa. And I was like, no.
A little
So
different,
I
huh?
think I think it's like an El Paso thing because you'll see
Ah,
caldillo on like menus here.
okay.
So it's more stewy
Yeah.
than soupy.
More stewy than soupy. Awesome.
Mhm.
Awesome. It was such a pleasure reading the book. It was such a pleasure talking to you. I hope you enjoy the heck out of your like the tour, virtual and in person. And I hope people listening will get the book. There's so much about grief and about there's almost so much beauty in the book too. The special relationship with the grandma and grandpa. I mean, there's nothing like it. And so, thanks for sharing something that's like crazy personal and emotional. So, it's awesome to talk to you too about the rationales and the background and all that. So I just want to wish you great luck in the future and thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you. I had so much fun. I feel like we could have stayed on here for hours.
Same. Oh, cool. You got another hour and a half. Let's go.
Let's do
All right.
it.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks.